Hello and welcome to part one of this beginner's guide to making games. The idea behind this series is that I'm going to introduce you to a new piece of software called Construct 3. Now, you don't have to download this software. You can if you like, but you can just run it through the browser. So open up a Google Chrome browser or Firefox. I don't think it works on Internet Explorer. And just search for construct.net or Construct 3. And then come to this site and then you can get started. So all we need to do is click here to try it now, and then hit launch, and it's going to launch the engine for us. Now, there are some limitations with this. We get a limited amount of code we can use, and we also get a limited amount of levels or layouts and layers and things like that. But that shouldn't matter too much for what we're doing, because we're just making a simple sort of Space Invaders clone, but it's going to be a little bit different because the enemies aren't going to be moving down the screen in a line. We're going to just do some really simple stuff so that you can make your first ever game. This is for absolute 100% beginners. I'm going to go through everything step by step so that you can make your very first game. If you're finding Unreal Engine a little bit intimidating, this is a great place to start because, it does a lot of the stuff for you. So let's get right at it. The first thing we're going to do is click up here to create a new project. And I'm going to call this Space Invaders clone. Again, it's not going to work exactly like Space Invaders, but it'll work similar. Then we want to change this preset to 720 portrait. Okay, that's the way that our layout is going to be displayed. And then we can leave the rest of this and then hit create. Okay, so when the engine opens up, it'll look something like this. Okay, so let's just talk about basic navigation. So if we want to move around, this is where we will build our game, and this dotted line here is the representation of our screen. So this is going to be our entire level, but this is what will appear on screen. If I quickly just add something to this, like a sprite, for example, I'll go through this in a minute, and place this here, and then hit play up here. It will open a browser for us, and we'll see that we have that on the screen. But if we move this over here, let's see, it doesn't show up on the screen. So this is what anything we place here will be on our screen. Okay, so we'll just delete that for now and delete that from there. Okay, so let's talk about navigation. So we can move around with these, like I've just said. Or if you want to zoom out, you can hold down Control and use your middle mouse button, and then you'll be able to see the whole thing. For now, just zoom out to about here. Now, the first thing we want to do for this game is make this screen the same size as this screen, because we don't want there to be extra space around the screen. We just want to work towards having all assets and all the level on one screen. So we need to reduce the size of this overall layout. So if we come to over here to the project and click on this top one, it'll give us all the details of the project, including the viewport size, which is 720 by 1280. Now you can just remember that, or you can come over here and copy that by left clicking and then dragging over it so it's selected blue. Right click and then hit copy, and then come over to where it says layout 1. So here you'll see layouts and layout 1. We can add more layouts and more event sheets. We'll get to that soon. So click on layout 1, and then here where it says size, we can just click that again and paste. Okay, and then hit enter, and now our entire layout is just the size of our screen, and that's what we want for this game. Okay, so with that done, we need to start making a player character for us to control. All right, so in order to do that, just right click. So you can right click anywhere that's not got a sprite in. As soon as we've got none in so far, you can right click anywhere and then insert new object. Now here is where all the objects that are built into the engine that we can use. Now the one we want is a sprite. Now you can come down and find the icon, or you can just type in sprite up here, or just SP, and then it'll alphabeticalize those in the order that in regards to the spelling. Okay, so click sprite and then hit insert, and then we'll get this cross. Now wherever we click is where the sprite will be placed inside the level. So that cross is just to represent that, but it doesn't matter because we can move them afterwards. So just click anywhere. Now, because this is the player, I'm just going to grab a green and the paint bucket tool. So if you can't see this color palette for whatever reason, it might be because this needs moving down. So you just might need to grab this and move it down a little bit so you can see these colors. Sometimes that isn't displayed. So grab a green, get the paint bucket tool and just fill that in green. Okay. Now every time we create something, we need to come over to this left-hand side and give it a name. So I'm going to call this player with a capital P, and then we need to give it a size. So the size I'm going to use for this is going to be 64, then a comma, and then 64. Okay, and then that's going to make my player that size. Right, so what we want as well, when I move this around, it's just moving freely at the moment. But what I want it to do is snap to a grid. Okay, and in order to turn on the grid, what you do is just click again, left click anywhere in empty space, and then you'll get the properties of the level. So over here under editor, we can show the grid and we can snap to the grid. All right, and we can change the size of the grid. So if I wanted to make it, because we're working 64 by 64, then I can change the grid like that. Now you'll notice that this is actually not on the grid perfectly, but that's fine. It's snapping to a center point, which is what I want. So now I can move this around, but it's only going to snap to the points on the grid, which is exactly what we want. But I'm also just going to not show the grid. So it's an invisible, but if I move, I will only be able to move on the points of the grid. So grab your player and move him down to the bottom here. And then what we need to do is we need to make him to move. Now, we could just write in this code ourselves, but the great thing about Construct is that it has a lot of these things built directly into it, so we don't have to do a lot of coding. That's why I use this software for prototyping 3D games and for game jams and stuff like that. So even if you are have you already learned some Unreal and you think, oh, why do I need this? It's great for quick prototypes for putting ideas together. So get back to where we were. Now I want to give this guy what we call some behaviors. So with him selected, you can select him over here or come to the object types and select him. And then come over here to where it says behaviors, this blue writing that says behaviors, click on that and then click add new behavior. And what we want is right down at the bottom is under the movements, and we want this 8 directional movement. So we'll click on that and hit add. All right, now anytime we add anything or change anything, it's always a good idea to have a test to see what's happening. So let's hit play. Now, we can move our character with the arrow keys, but you'll see he can also go for a wander. So if we move left and right, he does move left and right, and that's what we'll definitely want. But he'll also move around the layout, and we don't want that. We don't want that. So what we need to do, with him selected again, is come over here to the behavior options. Now you can see we can set a speed, an acceleration. That's how fast he'll get to the max speed. Same for the deceleration, how slow. Here, though, we've got 8 directions. Now we can up and down, left and right, the 4 directions, or full 8 directions. Now we only want to be able to move left and right. So let's click that. And for the set angle, we'll set no, because we don't want him to turn. Okay, now we'll keep default controls and we'll hit play now. And now all I can do is move left and right with the arrow keys, which is exactly what we want. All right, so that's our player set up. Now what we'll need to do is give him a bullet to shoot. So same process that we just went through, right click anywhere. Oh. Insert new object, sprite, click somewhere to place it, and this time it's going to be black for the bullet. Make sure you've got the paint bucket tool selected, fill that in, and then we've got to give it a name. So we'll call this bullet. We'll call it player bullet. Player underscore bullet, and we're going to make the size 32, 32, 32. Okay, so that's going to be a little bit smaller than the player. And what we need to do is give this some behaviors too. So with it selected, come over to the blue writing that says behaviors, add new behavior, and we want to give it, come down to the movement again, and we want to give it this bullet behavior. Okay, so we've given it that. Let's just see what happens if we place it in the layout and hit play. Okay, so it zooms off to the right. The reason it zooms off to the right, and this is going to become important later on, is that, right, if you think of your angles from school, you know, your 0 and 180 and all that. Now, when you normally think about it, 0 would be at the top, right, at 12 o'clock, if it was a clock. Now, in Construct, let me just open up a sprite so that I can I'll just open up this sprite and I'll just delete this, and then I can draw this to show you. So normally, just do a sort of very rough circle. Normally, this is 0. Okay, that's 0, and most things start at the angle 0. But in construct, the problem is that the 0 is here. Okay, so that's 0, that's 90, that's 180, and this is 270. Okay, so that is why it's zooming off to the right. And again, that will become important later on when we can't figure out why things aren't going in the correct directions. And that is because this is 0. Okay, so let's just Control Z to undo that. Control Z works everywhere. So if you ever make a mistake, you can Control Z and that'll undo. So that's the reason why it's shooting off in that direction. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to tell the game that we don't want it to shoot off until it's been spawned in. So we want to spawn in the bullet, and then it's going to go in its direction. So this is where we go over to the event sheet. But before we do that, we've got to tell the computer that we want to use the keyboard. So right-click to insert new object. I've been getting problems with this right-click. There we go. Insert new object. And under inputs, so we can add a gamepad, we can add a keyboard, mouse, and touch. We just want the keyboard for this one and hit insert. Now it'll add that under our object type, so when we go to the event sheet, we can access the code for the keyboard, which is what we're going to do. So on the top here, we've got a start page where we started a new project. You can close that down. And if you accidentally close down layout 1, for example, all you have to do is come over here, double click on it, and it'll pop back up. So you never really lose this stuff if you accidentally close it down, so don't worry if that happens. So, and if you find yourself not orientated, just hold Control and middle mouse button, and then you can zoom out or zoom in. All right. Okay, so what we want to do is go to the event sheet. So this is where we're going to be writing our code. Now, it's all visual scripting, and it's all object orientated, so it's really nice and easy to understand and to learn. But what we have is a event and then an action. Now, an event is a if statement. If this happens, and your event is a then statement, then do this. And that's be easier to explain to just go through it. So let's add our first event. And this is going to be a keyboard event. And what we want is we want this. These are all the keyboard options, but what we want is on key pressed. Okay, and then it's going to ask us which key. So click to choose, and then it's going to give you an option. All you do is press the key that you want. So I want spacebar. So I hit spacebar and then hit OK, and then you'll see that verified there. So this is the if statement. If the keyboard key is pressed, and then we get the option to add the action, which is the then statement. Then do this thing. Okay. Well, what we want is we want the player. And then up here, type spawn, and then we'll get spawn another object, and then it'll ask you which object, and we want the player bullet, okay? And then hit done. And it's as simple as that. If the keyboard button space is pressed, player spawns a bullet. Okay, you couldn't get more simple than that. So we'll hit play, and we'll see that bullet still comes across from the side of the layout, because all that stuff still exists, we just can't see it. And you'll see we're shooting a bullet. Now, that bullet doesn't shoot in the correct way, okay, which is not right. But there's an easy way to fix this. What we're going to do is I'm going to come in here and just draw an arrow on our player. You don't have to do this, but this is just going to demonstrate what's happening. So if I just quickly draw an arrow at the 0 point, and what's happening is it's using the player's spawn or its angle to decide which angle to spawn, right? So an easy way to fix this would just be to change the angle of the player to 270. That's going to switch the arrow to be going up, and it's going to mean that my bullets are spawning in the correct direction, which is great, okay? So that fixes that problem. Also, while I'm in here, I can move and shoot, so, you know, we've basically got a game now. We should just stop here before we mess it up. All right, but before we do that, let's add an enemy. So let's right-click, insert new object, sprite, click anywhere, and this time I'm just going to make him red because I go for red for enemies, green for players, and I have some other color stuff that we'll go into later. We're going to call this enemy underscore 01. We might create a few of these. We call it, we'll give a number on there. If we duplicate this, then it will, or clone it, should I say, then it will keep this number naming convention and call it 02. Okay, should do anyway. Right, so enemy 01, and then we'll make the size the same size as us, so 64,64. And we'll change these sizes later. It's just for now we need just placeholder stuff. Later on we're going to go into Google search and get some ships from that and make this all look pretty. But for now we just want this placeholder stuff. Okay, so we've placed this enemy in here, but we've not given him any behaviors or told him to do anything with the code. So let's do that. What we want is we want this guy to always be moving down the screen. Okay, but let's give him a behavior before we do the code. So add new behavior, and this behavior is called a sine wave. So it's right down at the bottom, and it's SINE, and it's this little line like this. And what this is it gives your player like a movement, and it gives it on a curve that you define over here. Best way is just to show you. So I'll just, and you see now that it's moving backwards and forwards. And we can change, so the period is the amount of time. So if we made that shorter, he would go faster, I believe. He has to cover that distance in a shorter time. And the magnitude is how much he's going to move. So if I turn up to 100 again, he'd have to go faster because he now has to cover more ground in the amount of time. Right? So we want that because we don't want the enemies just to be sitting targets. We want them to be moving a little bit. So we'll leave that for now. We'll come and refine that later. But what we want to do now is tell it to always be moving down the screen. All right, so let's go to our event sheet and let's add a new event. So this is event number 2. And this is an event for the enemy. So click on him. And then in the search bar, type move. No, that's not right. Sorry. Add an event. It's the enemy 01 event. So same as before. And then we want on created. Okay, so when this first gets created into the game, or when it first spawns in, like at the very beginning of the game, because we're going to be using a spawner to spawn these in, so we'll see if this works with it just being placed. So when the enemy is being created, then we want it to move. So click on the enemy again, and then we want to type in move, and we want to set move at angle. Okay, so the angle, remember, if it's down, it's 90. Okay, and the distance I want to set is to 2. And we also want this to be on what's called a tick. Okay, so what we want to do here is right click, and we want to, so in this blue part of the, in fact, I'm just going to get rid of this and go through this again because I've made a bit of a blunder here. So I apologize for that. Now, here we're going to open this up, and instead of going straight here, we're going to go to system. Okay. And this is all the system stuff we can do. And what we want to write here is tick. Right? A tick is something that happens every frame, or a lot every frame. All right. So it's actually like a microsecond, smallest amount of time the computer can calculate, I think. So it's different on every computer as well. But we'll get more into that later. So every tick, we want it to move. So double click on the enemy, and we type move at angle, and we want the angle to be 90. And we want the distance, say 2. Okay, we can change that. So now if we hit play, we'll notice that he's moving down the screen and doing that wave that we told him to do as well. All right. So that's all we need to do to get that enemy moving. And if we placed in, now to duplicate something, all you need to do is hold down Control and pull out from the object. Okay, so I've got him selected. I'm holding Control. I click left mouse and I drag, and that's duplicating those. All right. So so they're moving completely the same because they're all the exact same type. So they'll all interact in the exact same way. Okay, let's check the time. All right, we've gone over for this. So in the next video, what we'll do is we'll add some interaction between these so that we can kill these guys and these guys can kill us. And hopefully we'll start adding like a lives and score and all that kind of juicy stuff, and getting these guys, the enemies spawning in randomly and all that. Okay, so I'll catch you in the next one.